Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sketchwave, our weekly show where we talk all things digital art because we're both digital artists here on YouTube in the Procreate space. My name is Joel, otherwise known as JoelCreate, and my co-host is the one and only James Julier. James, how has your week been since we last spoke?
Very good. Yeah, I've got the kids at home. I know I talk about the kids every time, but they're a big part of my life. So now they're off on school holidays, so I'm entertaining a lot during the week, trying to keep up with the tutorials and the other commitments I've got. But yeah, I'm kind of playing dad or being dad.
So you've not been
playing
doing
dad.
too much of the traditional work then this week, or for the next 6 weeks,
Not
really?
as much. No, it's going to go off on the back burner a little bit. I'm going to move house in the next couple of weeks as well. So yeah, busy times, but all good.
Exciting.
All good. How about yourself? You've not been
As
the
you
best,
know,
have
I
you?
was ill yesterday and my skin is looking a lot more colourful than it was yesterday. Apparently, it was very green. So I actually feel great, which is good. So I feel like sleeping all day has really refreshed me and
What you
given me a lot
needed,
of
yeah.
energy. So yeah, at one point I was debating actually because I'd had a break from caffeine for so long on coffee. I thought, hang on, maybe this is the time that I wean myself off of it. But I stuck to my guns because I love it too much to just abandon it after years of drinking
Yeah.
it. So, in this week's episode, we've previously covered our top 5 favorite tutorials that we've made. And then in the episode prior to this one, we'll have covered our latest 5. And it's got a good amount of response from people enjoying the breakdown of our tutorials, which is really interesting that people want to see us break that down. So, we're actually going to make it a weekly segment. Sometimes it won't be as long, of course, as the previous ones. The other ones were fairly long. But just covering our previous tutorials and just giving them a bit of a breakdown. And then in this episode, we're also going to go ahead and talk about a fun conversation, really, about where the future of Procreate could be and maybe brainstorm a few random ideas for where that goes. So let's start off, as I mentioned, with our previous set of tutorials. I want to start, as always, with your latest YouTube tutorial.
Sure.
Give us a breakdown of the tutorial and what you enjoyed about it.
Yeah, it's a mossy kind of forest path this time. I was considering doing a stream and adding a water element, which I may end up doing in the extended version, which I haven't done yet. But I wanted a dramatic kind of difference of light source between the vibrant greens. I've kind of done a very similar one with the bridge and lots covered in moss and the kind of vibrant greens in the foreground or certain areas, and then kind of cooler greens in the more shadowy parts. I really struggled with this one. I'll be honest. It was a bit of a nightmare. Not so much the middle distance parts, but the foreground. I've ended up doing a depth of field trick where it blurs out the foreground quite a lot, mainly in a bid to just disguise the fact that to not have to try to explain how to do the moss in the foreground. I think that it works overall as an effect anyway. But yeah, I was really the foreground stones were the bits that I was looking forward to doing the most, and then when I really just got lost in the teaching part of it and trying to break it down in a way that was going to be something I could communicate. Appropriate word to stumble on, but yeah, it was just proving a little bit difficult to actually get it down to a series of steps. So yeah, I mean, I'm overall happy with the scene and the lighting, especially, but man, I really struggled on this one at times. Yeah,
Foreground can be a nightmare, can't it? Because
yeah,
they're the things that you have to go every step that you get closer to camera, essentially, or the person's view, however you imagine these scenes.
yeah.
The details got to ramp up another level, and you've got to introduce additional details that aren't potentially in those stones a little bit further back in the design. Is that potentially where the frustration came from, or is it
Yeah,
something
it was
else
just
in
trying
that?
to get the sense of the moss was kind of enveloping the stone in a way that felt like it was just creeping up the edges of it, and it kind of was okay in the middle distance, but the foreground ones just the effect just wasn't getting right. The types of greens weren't looking and sitting right for the shadow parts of it. So it may be that I just return to that tomorrow, which will be in the past at the point of airing this tutorial, this episode. I may well return to it tomorrow and just try and figure out how to get the more detailed version of the moss in the foreground looking a bit more realistic. The greens, there's something about it. They needed to be a bit more muted, I think, or something. It just wasn't sitting right. So yeah, I mean it's okay. I
It's
did a
a
kind of rough version of it on the tutorial, and it got away with it. But I really want to focus on it and get it sorted.
it's a lovely piece, and I feel
Thank you.
like it's part of a triangle of tutorials you've done recently, and they all kind of semi cross each other across each one. The stream that you did in the previous week, obviously with that kind of stone effect from front to back, but then the mossy bridge as well. It's
Yeah,
kind of like I could almost imagine that if you were to apply the same water effects on top of that moss and stones, it would almost be like a sister tutorial, like fully to the stream one
sure,
that you did, but without that step down kind of thing.
definitely.
The it what I think I think lately for a lot of your tutorials, it really sums up that kind of mentality of utilizing like similar tools and similar um, techniques in order to replicate certain things in your designs, like the foliage in the background and not covering absolutely everything. And a lot of those have kind of passed across from a few tutorials, but it helps you then focus then on what's your main element, and then bringing in the moss from
Yeah,
your bridge one, and then the stones from um, the stream one as well, and combining it all together into a brand new creation in a brand new world in a different scene almost.
definitely. I mean, I think that I don't have a master plan that rolls ahead for months in advance like yourself. I tend to stumble upon each tutorial week to week, and I don't always know what I'm going to do in advance. And so I get on a little bit of a roll when I'm enjoying a certain type of subject matter, and I just want to dig a little bit deeper in another similar but slightly different form. And that tends to be what happens. I get a block of tutorials that kind of interplay and relate to each other, and then I have to kind of dig a bit deeper and go somewhere new, really, for the sake of the audience. But yeah, I tend to sort of like think, oh yeah, I could do this with it, or oh yeah, I could do that with it, and return to it just because I'm still interested in the kind of the approach and the format. Um, I think for next week's tutorial, I'm going to have to go in a different direction, which I still haven't decided. But yes, it'll happen. So yeah, in terms of your approach and your tutorial, you've got a really more fantasy element on yours that I think is working really well, and I really love that underwater theme. Tell us about that.
The design was like a trident or uh, God, I can't even remember the guy, the underwater god. Can't remember
Aquaman.
Neptune's or Aquaman. Let's just roll with that. But his
Yeah.
trident. Um, there's two. I almost when I look at this, I kind of split it down into two aspects. I really love the background kind of scene, the kind of large stone columns, the the lighting on them. I really enjoy, and then kind of the foreground elements. And I kind of wish I'd done a little bit more in terms of just blending the two kind of environments together a little bit more. With there is a step actually towards the end of this where in the background, the that how you really get that kind of murky underwater scene is I'll duplicate the whole of that back scene, blur it, and then set the blend mode to lighten, and it always gives that kind of underwater scene where you're losing vision as things get
Right.
further away. And now my camera's out of focus because I just did that,
Okay.
but it helps give that kind of murkiness to it that just takes away a lot of it. It makes it look really lifelike that it's underwater. And I did add another step of it right at the end and gave people the option: do you want to blur the whole scene at the front as well to give it that
Mhm.
kind of vision, as if you're stood there on the rocks and looking at the scene, and you can decide. I preferred the version without it, but overall, I really enjoyed the tutorial. It's something I actually had planned for. In terms of planned, I drew one ages ago. I might even throw it up on screen if I can find it, just the initial kind of mock up of it. And it went in a completely different direction, which I really enjoyed. I really liked the filling out the background of the scene as well, with all the tiny little fishes in a school coming through the columns, just to give the background a little bit of life as well. But all in all, I like the contrast. Sorry, the complementary colors between the yellow and blue. That it helps that staff really stand out, and I had fun with it. But again, I think a bit of a nod really to what you were saying about the foreground elements. They require a lot of love and a lot of detail being that close to you, that like
Yeah,
rocks, for example,
I'm just looking at the
duration
image
wise,
now.
you
It may
need
look
to
like I'm
spend some
checking my
time.
phone, which I'm looking at the image on my phone. I am looking at related thing. I'm not just texting anyone. But yeah, I think you've got a really nice foreground area of texture. The colours and the texture of that kind of plinth that's got the my mind's gone blank now. The trident on.
Staff,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's a trident, isn't it? Yeah, I think that the color and the texture there is just perfect for the overall image and kind of subject matter. It's really nice. So I think in terms of the foreground detail, I think you've mastered it on that one. It looks great.
Thank you. I really like the yeah, with a scene like that, you can get away with adding in, I think, a lot of like lighting effects towards the end. There are
Mm.
light beams coming down, which might be able to see look revisiting it, but lots of soft airbrush beams coming down from the sky, from the water above, which
Yeah,
you can just layer on all these kind of fun fantasy elements to them and just have fun with it. I messed around with different brushes in the staff itself that I don't really use that much. At the minute I'm really trying to utilize a few different brushes that I've not used before. Sometimes that's to the detriment of the audience, and it hacks a few people off only because there's some of these brushes can be really funny to work with. But I want to explore them and see what they have that are available, and see what use cases we have for them as well, which is always fun when you find one that's just such a you just immediately know, I just know where I can utilize this. Like
yeah.
you'll have thought it with the rainforest brush, all the different sort of textures for using that one. By the way, we should get paid every time, or should we make it a drinking game even, just to say if we say rainforest brush,
Oh
so
no.
listeners have got to down a drink or something like
Yeah,
that. It's definitely got to be
they
on our
have to.
bingo
Yeah.
card.
Yeah.
Yeah, not us. No, I don't think that's even allowed on YouTube. But yeah, I had fun with it. I think I could have done a bit more. I think looking at yours and mine side by side, I think I might have actually got away with doing some kind of soft blur towards the bottom of that, just to try and send the focus up the design a little bit towards the staff, and not focus on that foreground so much. But I had fun with it, and it's done pretty well. Not as good as the cottage, but it's done pretty well.
Yeah, your cottage one's doing exceptionally well, isn't it? It's really taking off, which is great to see.
I want to explore though the concept a little bit more of I'm going to do exactly the same kind of process, but only focusing on say like a stony sculpture but underwater that has no foreground to it in that sense. It's like I
Okay.
really want to create when I created the columns in the background, I was like, I can see some sort of like stone like monument under the water, and give it that murkiness, and then it's almost like the distance of which you can see through water is very short, isn't it? It's kind of like a shallow distance, so you
Yeah.
very quickly get that murky background.
Yeah.
So I think I could literally draw some sort of like underwater coliseum and really have some fun with it, and all that very top-down lighting onto all of the little ledges of all the rocks. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
if anything, it sparked more ideas for future tutorials as well.
Yeah, I think the whole underwater theme is something that there's just loads to explore with that, isn't there? I mean, just the coral things. I mean, I've considered doing coral tutorials. I think you've done one as well, and I know other people have done
Mm.
one. I'm trying to find the right way for me to do it. I haven't quite found it yet because coral is just full of texture, isn't it? And trying to find the right level of texture, how to convey it without just spending a week doing it. So, yeah, I do
Well, I
intend to do
broke
one
mine
myself.
I broke mine down of the underwater coral scene with the clownfishes because I said exactly the same thing to myself, that there's so much texture
Mm,
required in all of that coral that what brushes are going to do it justice. You're going to spend a lot of time potentially in it, and it's not the subject of the design either. The clownfish was. So mine was actually more breaking it down really simple and just using the dry ink brush for just like outline textures, and then soft airbrushes just to add in
yeah,
just gradients, and just keeping it kind of almost vectory, almost illustration style,
sure.
rather than getting super granular with detail. But yeah, I think your audience would love an underwater design. But like you said, that texture is going to be a lot
Mm,
to find.
yeah, I'll figure it out one day.
Well, we've only just got structures, so let's
Yeah,
let's
it's
just
true. It's
count our
true.
blessings while we got them. So after we've discussed our tutorials, like I said, I wanted to discuss maybe what the future of Procreate looks like, because at the minute we've probably not had very many updates for quite a while. Their direction has obviously been in Procreate Dreams area for a while, and building that out. So Procreate's probably been on the back burner in terms of new features. I think the last set of features we had were a lot to do with Apple Pencils, whether it's the squeeze or the barrel roll. So they're kind of features tied into something else, not quite just built in
Yeah,
features for everybody. I think from my mind, I think maybe the largest update was probably the 3D renders to go into
Yeah.
Procreate. Is that
They've
something
probably
you ever
spent a
thought
long
about
time
messing
on
with?
Dreams, haven't they? So they've spent a lot of energy and attention building that app. Um, and I think that maybe they've been focusing on that rather than fundamentally changing the drawing and painting app, Procreate. But yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to for us just to think about what they could potentially do in a kind of far off future. I think in the short term, little tweaks are possible, but I kind of like the idea of where it could potentially become in the far flung future. I think it is more interesting to think in those terms.
I think in the short term, we're going to get a lot more quality of life features. I think a
Yeah.
lot of those dream features were promised to come over to Procreate in terms of the dreams file format, which doesn't have a capacity, a limit, should I say, on layers. The
Yeah.
way it's been built has been totally different. It's not based around the RAM anymore as such. It's built within the file to then be able to
Mm.
do a lot more. So I think for that feature will, that'll be a great quality of life for a lot of people. And to be fair, I mean, I've asked a friend actually today, I'm just waiting to hear back. They bought a brand new iPad recently, and I was really curious what just the base iPad, the iPad 10, has available in terms of layers on a
Yeah.
2000 by 2000 canvas. Because I think that at this point, if you buy a new iPad, I don't think you necessarily should ever really have a question of, oh, I don't think I have enough layers. I really think at the minute,
No.
based on how Procreate is optimized, we got to a point where all of the new iPads are able to, deal with all of those kind of things in terms of layers and not being a bit of a restraint almost. So
I
I
mean,
think,
I don't know about you, but I tend to structure things in the tutorials. I become a little bit conscious if there's too many layers, and I try to condense them together a little bit,
mm,
thinking that there might be some people out there with an iPad that's many years old now, even at this point, still following along. I think there are. I think on the A4 format, there's certain iPads that limit it at 300 dpi to 19 layers. I think something around that
okay.
region. So I try not to go beyond that kind of threshold, really,
Mm,
just to make sure everyone can follow along. But yeah, I don't think it's that much of an issue these days. I think if you have one within the last year or two, I think, I mean, it's not infinite number of layers, obviously, but I think they have a healthy number, don't they? I
yeah.
mean, I don't tend to use hundreds of layers in a piece of work anyway. Do you, when you're doing your own individual work?
I think the maximum I've done is 50, I think.
Which is quite a lot of layers
But
still. Yeah.
yeah, but the thing is though, what I do, and I always try to accommodate in that sense is, if we break a design down from back to front, I'll start with the sky, let's say, try and get that all done first, and then I will personally group it together and call it sky,
Yeah.
and then I will tell the audience, listen, at this point, if you're concerned about layers, you can flatten this group down, or you can keep the layers in case you want to tweak them later on. Of course, if you
Sure. Yeah.
flatten them, you can't make those adjustments. And then I try to keep that structure going from back to front or whichever direction we go. So saying like, oh, we're done with this section now. You can flatten them if you wish, or save them in case you want to make adjustments. So I hope that even though my final layer count might be about 40 to 50, usually around about 30, I think,
Yeah.
that they can participate in that sense of
Definitely. Yeah.
just being able
Yeah.
to compress where necessary. What do you? This question, I think, I don't think we necessarily have a massive wish list, but is there anything you can think off the top of your head that you would actually like Procreate to add into the app? And if the answer is no, then yeah, that's still a valid answer to the topic, really.
I think for me, because I do tend to rely upon the default brushes, and certainly within the tutorials, and I don't offer different brushes, I think that they could be more specific themed brushes, for example, around foliage. I try to, and flowers and just, fauna generally. I think that they could spend a bit more time just coming up with a few stock kind of textures that could be used in various formats. And like I said, I'm a little bit over reliant upon the rainforest brush because I try to stick to the default brushes. Um, if there were more options, if there were ones that look like more like kind of individual leaf textures, just generic, kind of pointy oval leaves. If they had a cluster of those shapes, I know they've got the snow gum brush that's within organic, but it's not quite right. It doesn't. It sends them all off in strange directions, and just have a few variations on a similar kind of theme like that, I think would be good. I mean, it's quite an extensive brush catalog that they give by default anyway. But for my personal use case, I think having a few more options within kind of drop down themes would be
Mm.
quite good. And I know that they get around that by saying that you can always create your own or download your own, and there's a ton of options out there. There's no question. But I think for the casual user that just downloads the app, I think to have a few more stock textures that deal with things like foliage would be really useful, because they kind of just vaguely touch upon it, I think, within the brushes.
So maybe like an extra tab in the brushes that come down. So where we've got all the list of our categories, you could put a tab that says categories or like
Yeah.
folders or whatever they refer, groups they
Mhm.
refer to them as, I think. And then another one that has said themes, and you could
Yeah.
go through them and see brushes that were in groups but have been pulled out and then categorized together.
Yeah.
I
Just
did
more
actually
brushes, I
see an
think.
article on Procreate's website, and I've got it up now. I'll put a link to it in the description down below. It's only a short article, but it's from Procreate about Kyle Webster joining Procreate. He's made a lot of very successful brushes over on Gumroad. Again, I'll leave a link to the full article so people can read it in the description. But that could be a really big win for the
Sure.
brush studio, and it kind of shows a little bit of kind of their direction as well, of saying, you know, getting people on board for that to then take those brushes and add new brushes as well to future updates, which could be something along the lines of what you just said there in certain
Yeah.
categories. I think you could break down painting as well into like subcategories almost, and have lots of them in like different traditional brushes, you know, in terms of textures and oil paints and water. I think more watercolor brushes would be awesome, but I know a lot of people love
Yeah.
those. Is that something you thought about doing for a tutorial, like a watercolor one
Watercolor.
at all?
I've not really, no. I mean, in the real world, so to speak, I've never really quite gelled with watercolors
Mm.
anyway. So having a digital version of that hasn't necessarily, appealed to me straight away. Do you use water? Have you used watercolor much?
Once, I think. Just the once, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to do more of it. But truth be told, I think watercolor for me is a little bit like a skill set to understand. And also, I don't think the default brushes do it any justice in terms of how the water works, etc. And also, I think for me, a little bit, my seeing how the watercolors work in Procreate, comparing to Adobe Fresco and their live watercolor brushes, where you just drop in
Right.
some color and it just continues on way after you put the color down, like a representative of the real world.
Yeah.
I kind of a little bit. It's not let down by the default brushes in Procreate, but it's a tiny bit really in that they just don't work in that way. And I think if they brought something like a live engine for brushes like that, that would be amazing to bring across, and like take that a step further as well, of like live brushes, you know, have brushes that are like oil paints but thick brushstroke oil paints that give you that 3D shadow of the brush strokes. Because
Yeah.
there's an app called Paint Set, I think it's called, and that is a painting app that's very very kind of tries to replicate a lot of the traditional brushes and also paint styles, and it will layer on paint in a 3D way, and it looks amazing how they
Right.
smudge
I'll
all
have
the
to check that
colors
out.
together,
Yeah.
and you get that 3D effect. It's really cool. I think it's free on the App Store as well, so I'll leave a link to it in the description down below for people to check out if they want. But that's a really cool app, and I think something like that would be really awesome to bring into Procreate.
Yeah.
Just take certain. You don't need them in every brush, do you? Like, there's only certain ones like watercolor and certain brushes that have very unique styling to them that would be really cool to bring across. Let's go a step further. Let's go beyond sort of like mini updates. Where do we think it's going to be in like 5 years from now? Like, because I see how the attention and love for the Apple Vision Pro. You know, do we think that we'll ever see Procreate in a VR space rather than just on our iPads? Like, is that the next level? Is that the next audience?
I would. Yeah, I think so, potentially. I mean, I kind of think once we get into the 3D environment, we're dealing with more sculptural forms, aren't we, in a sense?
Mm.
I know that they've got the ability to sort of, as we touched on before, the import 3D shapes and then paint the surfaces of them and turn them and paint them and texture them and things. But if we're talking about Procreate as it is and how that could be in a VR space, I kind of feel like it would be a 3D environment too. So the forms would be, it would be more along that route, or the route. Sorry, I'm getting very American where that came from. I know we have a large American audience, but still, we're very much English. Route. Um, I kind of, I don't know how they would interpret into a 3D space really, other than having, I suppose, a pretend canvas, and you could be
Mm.
kind of flicking paint in a virtual space, and it could be interacting with a pretend brush, I suppose, or a 3D brush, I
That's how
should
I
say, a
think
virtual
about it.
brush. Yeah.
In that
Um,
kind of, you've got a canvas on an easel in front of you, and maybe your colors or even your palette just
yeah,
in small little pots underneath the. Like, I guess they wouldn't go to all that skeuomorphism, is it, when they replicate like real world things in a digital world? I don't think it would ever go to that. I think it'd be very clean. You'd have a
could be a bit
grey
gimmicky,
sort of
couldn't it, if you're
banner,
not careful?
yeah,
Yeah.
and your palette maybe off to the side of a an easel with a canvas in front of you. I think that's where I think when I think of like the
Mm.
Apple Vision Pro with Procreate. I think it would be cool. I think it would be really awesome for us to, and I imagine it going beyond that. Like, what if we could have digital workshops where we've got members of our audience come and sit down in a virtual chair in like a row
Sure.
in a classroom, and we're at the front kind of thing, and demonstrate, like doing tutorials but in a very much like a live um studio environment for people to come and join in with. I think that'd be so cool, but super niche.
I think
I don't know how many people would participate.
I do like the idea of creating different environments possibly as well, because I know, for example, I've enjoyed going out, quite many years ago now, but certainly with a sketchbook and pencil and sketching from life, so you find some trees or a landscape and you draw it from life, and maybe it's a way of controlling an environment that you could use as an inspiration. And of course, it would
Mm,
be a VR environment, but many VR environments are basically the real world to look at now in terms of how convincing they are. So, if you wanted the experience of sitting out, it's a strange concept, isn't it? Of sitting out in the environment and sketching from life, but it all being a VR experience could be quite useful. You could control the lighting, and rather than the light changing over the course of the day, you could fix it at a certain point in the sky, and nothing would change, and you could sit there for hours and hours and hours in your virtual. I don't know. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? I think there might be a certain romanticism that just doesn't translate to the VR world.
mm.
There's something to be said about sitting out there in the real world and really smelling the smells and all the rest of it. Um, and I don't know whether that would translate, but I like the idea. I like the concept. It amuses me to think that you could be sat in an environment, because I guess it actually in reality, if you're working digitally anyway, then it already is removed from that physicalness,
Mm.
isn't it? It's just pixels in a file. Ultimately, even though we are using a tangible uh, Apple Pencil on a glass screen, the end product is just pixels. So maybe you think, well, I want a flower, I want a certain type of thing, and you can have it pinged there, and it's just you can put it closer or zoom in, or there's different ways that you could manipulate the environment to help inspire you, which I think could be
Mm.
really cool.
I
Um,
think there's something you would lose though by having a
mm,
digital canvas in front of you, and I guess just your fingers to holding a digital pencil or even holding the Apple Pencil. If you're not touching something, you've not got the response on the screen. You'd lose like pressure sensitivity, I guess, because the dynamics of that
yeah,
on a virtual canvas, you'd have to build. Yeah, we can get a bit techie here, but you'd have to build like thresholds of like how close you go to the canvas or even through it determines how hard you press, all that kind of stuff. I think it I think it could actually be a really cool partner to the iPad. Like, if you can bring obviously things from the real world in your actual environment into
yeah,
it.
more
If you were
augmented,
using your
isn't it? Really?
iPad as a, yeah, exactly. Like, if you bring your iPad into it and you can still see it and you can use the Apple Pencil on it, but you're in a classroom with other
Yeah,
people, I think that'd be an amazing experience and something that people would fall in love with, to be completely out of their home or whatever it may be, but still obviously at home, and be able to join in with a community of people as well, like somewhat face to face, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like in a
Yeah.
classroom with other people that are participating in a tutorial maybe at the same time. I don't want to get into the logistics of how that's even possible, but I think that the dream of that is really cool. I'm well on board for something like that. Definitely.
Yeah, I think it does sound exciting. I suppose we're stepping into the realms of the VR or the AR, um, and that the virtual rule world rather than Procreate there, aren't we? I think is there anything else that you think that specific to it? Say it was just an iPad format with the Apple Pencil, and not thinking in terms of virtual spaces. Is there anything else that you think that could be advanced beyond the current technology within Procreate?
Not beyond what we've already spoke about, really, like the live brushes concept of it.
Hmm.
I think they might probably move into adding in vector brushes in terms of just making it a bit more professional. Like they always talk about it being for professionals, but if you can't export something like in an SVG file or anything like that, you have to then take your design and go do it again in another app and
Yeah.
reline it up again in like Illustrator. So I think they'll definitely bring in like more professional features like that, and they'll probably just be brushes. Um, I mean, Adobe Fresco does it really well, where you can, when you create a new layer, you say, is this a vector layer or is this a pixel layer? And then when you go to that layer, you get only those types of brushes for that layer. So it allows you to keep the brush library a little bit simple and not like pack everything into one, because you would need a separate layer, I would imagine, for each one, just to, because the rules of how those layers and those brushes work are very different to each other, pixel
Yeah.
versus vector. So yeah, I can see them moving into those types of professional tools in that sense. Other than that, I mean, I made a video a long time ago. It was like a Procreate 5.4, my wish list, and it was just very simple things at the time, and it
Yeah.
still is fairly simple things, because I think the beauty of it is the fact that it is so simple. It's not too. I know we've said about this topic before, and obviously we're very used to it compared to people joining brand new. But you
Sure.
put
Yeah.
somebody in a room and make them pick between two drawing apps, whether it's Procreate or Photoshop, and they're always going to pick Procreate because it just looks so much easier to use. And I think it's great at what it does in that sense, that it keeps it simple. Is there any ideas that you think that they think that could integrate maybe into the current structure of it?
Yeah, I struggle to think. I mean, I guess it's not. We're not in the position where we're forced to have to come up with these ideas. I think it gets increasingly difficult because the obvious ones have kind of been satisfied, haven't they? Have already been catered
Mm,
for. I think if anything, there's elements now that I just will never use. I will never. I say never. You should never say never, but I can't imagine myself using the 3D forms and painting on 3D forms within the app. Um, I think at this point, it really has a danger of spilling over into having too many different things that you can do. And I'm glad that they've separated out the Procreate Dreams, and they haven't tried to kind of integrate it all together as another feature
mm.
within the app, because it's such obviously a big, because they had the animation within Procreate for a while, didn't they? Um, I'm not even sure whether they still do. I suppose they probably still do.
I
Um,
think so. Yeah.
but again, it's another area that I tested out when it first came out, and I never do use. Um, there's two big elements of the app that I personally don't find that interesting and don't use. And there's the risk, isn't it, that the whole interface and all of the drop
Mm.
down menus and everything about it just becomes cluttered and heavy with things that you don't find that interesting. I really like the kind of purist approach that it is a painting and drawing app first. Um, I just want them to do that better, really. Or they do it exceptionally well now, anyway. But like I say, if they can just fine tune the fundamentals and really just try to improve that quality of experience, there's not a great deal that I feel that in the short term that I can imagine. And I guess that's the thing with technology, isn't it? Is that there are hundreds and there are thousands of people that work for these organizations that brainstorm and come up with these ideas. I suppose one thing I can think of, which is more of a technological advance really, probably coming from Apple, would be the idea that with the Apple Pencil you could flick ink and make splashes with it and treat it like a brush
That'd
and
be
actually
cool.
flick. It's not something I do that often with my work and my approach, but just having it be a bit more reactive to the way that you actually handle it as an implement. And we've spoken previously in a different episode about the idea that you could have different nibs for the Apple Pencil that would relate to the apps differently as well. So if it had a brush that fanned out, you could have different strands that painted. So if you pressed on more, it would fan out and it would interact as live elements within the actual brush that you're using. I think that could be interesting, because then you could get like stippled effects and things like that, and really play around with the way that you use the brushes there. But it feels like that really is more of an advance that probably needs to come from Apple first, rather than Procreate. Um, yeah,
I think you could take a step beyond that as well. I've mentioned, like you said, we mentioned this in a previous episode of the canvas itself, rather than it just being a plain solid piece of color. In other apps, you have the option to pick a canvas style texture that is representative of real world kind
yeah,
of textures of paper and canvas, and everything else in between, which then actually does affect the ink that you put on the screen as well, and affect how it's actually applied. And again, to touch on a previous point of then feedback through the Apple Pencil, we've got
yeah,
the haptic engine in there now. I really strongly think that is a feature that will come. I really
yeah,
do. I think they want to tie as many features into the Apple Pencil now, rather than put the pressure on the developers so much. Is put the features into the Apple Pencil rather than the developers, so that the pencil is just this magical experience of drawing
yeah,
on the screen, and gives you that paper feedback, sorry, of drawing on the iPad screen. I think that'd just be amazing. And I've not even got the Apple Pencil Pro because I'm still with my iPad. So, when you upgrade and you'd get all of those suite of features, hover, squeeze, barrel roll, textured feedback, that'd sell it for someone like me a little bit more, to say, no, these are the things I want. Because I feel like for us as
yeah.
well, we would get a lot of use out of the textured feedback, because it's something that doesn't really matter necessarily to an audience member, because we would get the luxury of feeling that. And that's not something that even makes a difference to our videos as such.
Mm.
I think there's other options as well that I really think that Procreate, I don't know if it, and I don't want to get really pessimistic on this at all, because it's still the number one selling app on the App Store. Everybody
Sure.
gets it when they get an iPad. It's what most people buy an iPad for. I would love to know the percentage of people that, if they were quizzed at checkout, say, what are you buying this for? And I can guarantee a huge percentage of the people buying it is for Procreate. But
Mm.
if whether or not the Procreate bubble comes to bursts a little bit and goes on sorry, I was going to say decline. The decline, I'm doing it now. Is the other features that would come as a result of that? Because I feel like if the Procreate bubble kind of bursts a little bit, and that maybe they're not getting as many new downloads, I really feel that they will branch out into other markets. I strongly and this is just like a personal belief, is that I think that there is some sort of contractual thing going on with Procreate and an Apple, where they say, listen, just keep it over here because it's sells like hotcakes.
Yeah.
It's like, again, probably the main reason why most people buy an iPad to draw. Let's just keep it here, optimize it here for as long as you can, or as long as the contract duration may be, and like they enjoy that partnership as well, because obviously they're in
Must
the
be some perks
keynotes
in
and
it for
everything
them,
like
mustn't
that.
they, to keep it
Exactly.
exclusive? Yeah.
There's probably a lovely app store percentage split between them as well. They've probably got a
Mm.
favorable deal as well, and all those types of things. And the publicity of being in an Apple a keynote must be amazing for them as a company. The recognition above all the rest as well. But I do feel at some point that there will be additional versions that will be made available across Android and Windows. I've already seen, and I can't remember where I saw it, but rumors that they're actually working on a Windows version of Procreate. So whether or not, again, in my weird world where I imagine there's some sort of contract between them. Maybe like, they're allowed to do that, but maybe not Android just yet. They've said in the past about Android, and because there's not a lot of great Android tablets, there's a few good ones. There's amazing Samsung Galaxy
Yeah.
S Ultra ones, and they're unbelievable. They look amazing. They make me want to buy one, but I would have no use for it. But if they moved into Android as well and Windows, I think this app would absolutely dominate just the drawing world as a whole. I just think
Yeah.
for them to move into those worlds, and yet they've got content, educational content from us, hundreds, thousands. I don't even want to know how many Procreate tutorials there are on YouTube.
I wonder whether
It's
it
got to
would
be
port
loads.
across successfully to some of the other, makes and models of tablets, because there's definitely a whole bunch of Android tablets that are nowhere near as powerful under the hood as the iPad.
Mm,
Um, the iPad has been kind of well known for being overpowered, really, in many respects, and it's way more power under the hood than it needs. But then conversely, that's there's other tablets that just don't have as the guts really to actually power. Especially now that apps like Procreate are getting more and more complex, would it need to be a simpler version of Procreate if it was going to go to a different, you know,
mm. Well, I wonder
tablet?
whether the Dreams format would actually, like the file format, would actually allow for tablets of even lesser power. Because if the file type is uh, uh, used to store all of the layers in, rather than in RAM, in temporary memory, then whether or not the file type would actually allow that to be like, okay, cool. It doesn't matter that you've got a lesser device, because we don't need 8 gigs of RAM or 16 or whatever it is. We can work in this. Certain things may run a little bit slower or open in larger files, but maybe it does allow for that kind of transport across then all models. And I mean, at Procreate at the minute, when you think about it, it can be used anywhere from an Apple Pencil Pro to an Apple Pencil USB-C to a cheap stylus to a
Sure.
capacitive stylus to all the way down to your finger. So
Yeah.
I guess really everybody would have an option available to them. It's just certain manufacturers would have better quality content, like the
Yeah.
Samsung tablets, with the S Pens that have got pressure sensitivity and tilt sensitivity, that Procreate would just potentially just slot right into that world. I don't know how it would work on Windows. I have no idea how it would work with the input of a mouse and a keyboard potentially, but that would be fascinating to see how that would work, and whether or not you could use it then with a what are those tablets called? Is it the big screens that you can draw on, that work with like a Windows machine or a Mac?
Cintiqs. The
Yeah,
Wacom
Cintiqs.
Cintiqs, is it? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, those types of tablets. I think in that world it would work perfectly fine, and that's what most digital
Yeah,
artists that work off of a computer would expect. So it's just
yeah.
another program to work off of.
And
And
certainly a
again,
better prospect than having to pay subscriptions for
true.
Adobe Photoshop stuff. And I know that Photoshop does way more, really, if you really dig deep into it and you're a professional level where you need all the extras. But I think for the majority of everyday users, something like Procreate formatted to a bigger screen probably would function completely well for them. Um, another thought that occurs to me, well, we've kind of touched upon it with several episodes, really, is the AI element, really, and how do you feel if AI were to be integrated more into
I'm
Procreate?
not talking about this. You carry on. I'm not dealing with any more stick from anyone having a go at me about AI and Procreate. Sorry, what
Yeah,
was the
but
question?
is there any way that you feel that AI could be integrated into Procreate that you feel that would be useful for you?
Now, when you say useful, I can think about use cases that would solve potentially like a question
Hmm.
that you had earlier about brushes. Um,
Yes.
I need a leaf brush,
Yeah.
and it just generate one there and then. Maybe
And it
ask you
kind
a
of
few
would be
questions on
brilliant, wouldn't
how.
it? It
That
kind
would
of
be
would be
cool.
brilliant, but
That would be amazing. And
mm,
like, you'd be able to, it maybe ask you a few questions to say, how do you want this brush to work? What type of leaf?
yeah.
You pick from maybe 4 or 5. What type of leaf do you need for your design? How do you want it to work? Do you want variation in color? Yes, no. Highlights and shadows in it? yes, no, in terms of the brightness and sliders that we know in the Brush Studio already, but just these quick and
Yeah.
easy, like wizard kind of builders for the brush, and then done. And your design doesn't have to suffer as a consequence. You can carry on now. You had a brush made for you, and you can go from there.
Yeah.
That would be sick. I think if it's a matter of generating content to go onto the canvas itself, as in, make me an image that looks like a
Completed.
castle on a hill,
Yeah.
then what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
it's just totally pointless. Um,
But
I
I
think
could
that,
see
yeah, I
that.
think
I
the
could see
brush
them
one.
integrating it to a point where it can just tailor to your individual needs. I mean, I guess the issue with brushes, unless you're prepared to go and download new brushes, there's always going to be a limit to the number of brushes
Mm,
that they can provide by default. So having an AI engine in there, because there must be ways that it could be tailored and integrated. And right at the minute, perhaps that would be a bit of a daunting task for Procreate. But you can imagine AI software and AI use cases becoming more and more fine tuned to individual apps as we go further along into the AI journey. I could definitely imagine them having the function to tailor your own brushes using,
mm,
generative engines. Um, I think it actually would be pretty cool. And I know that there's a backlash in terms of using AI to do anything these days, and I totally understand that. And because there is always going to now, from this point onwards, going to be a question mark over the authenticity, over the purist kind of side of things. And whereas I understand that, I don't think we can get away from the possibility now that technology, that AI has played a hand in the work we
mm.
see digitally in the world, and it is going to just be a factor. It's going to be it's going to be impossible to stamp it out anyway. And I think if you can find cool ways of integrating it into a workflow so that it doesn't take away from the genuine creativity, but it adds to your workflow and enhances what you do, then I'm kind of all for that. Because let's face it, let's be real about this. If it weren't for technology and the shortcuts and the advantage that it gives you, then we wouldn't be here talking about Procreate to begin with. Procreate itself is very much
It's
a
true.
distilled version of the real world into a digital format, and it gives you an immense amount of advantage and shortcuts. The images we've shown at at the beginning of the episode, the lighting effects and the ability to play around with depth of fields and layer it up, and it's just all the things that you cannot do with traditional materials. And so we've already divorced ourselves from the humble origins of having to mix oils and pigments together and daub it onto a textured surface. We're already so far removed from that anyway. That I kind of don't mind a couple of smaller steps forward that make use of AI to tailor your brushes, for example. I don't like the idea that AI does the work for us, but if it gets us closer to the brush textures, for example, or even just asking AI advice on how to do things, and with again something
True.
it could give you the rudimentary instructions on how to deal with compositional elements
Mm,
and how to deal with color theory and all these other things that it could be helpful for without someone having to go to a third party app like YouTube and hear us blather on about it. If it's just a very simple thing like what is the rule of thirds? How can I use composition to enhance this piece? And it gives you a pointer, a kind of heads up as to how to move forward and improve it. I don't necessarily see that as a terrible thing. How about you?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, you see those types of things everywhere. You go onto any website and a little chat bot pops up in the bottom right. How can we help you today? Whatever you
Yeah,
put in there is not, it's not a human punching that out to the right, category or the right, department. It's all based on like input and
yeah,
responses, and it's just what's the if you went to Google and typed in what's the rule of thirds, what's the difference between going into the
it's true.
Procreate AI that's been created to benefit artists? And again, I,
Yeah,
I totally want to make this clear, and I hate the fact that we're on AI already, but it's got it. we're talking about the future of what Procreate is. It's definitely
Yeah,
going to be there to some degree. So
yeah,
we might as well discuss it and have an open conversation about it. But the the fact, if you went to Google and typed in what's the rule of thirds, what's the difference between going to Procreate's AI that they've purposely built to educate and
hmm
provide content based around art and digital art, especially, that, there's no difference. There's
no,
absolutely no difference. And if it's buried somewhere in the app that doesn't affect the overall experience, and again, very clear, I want to be very clear, if it doesn't affect the canvas and it's simply there for education, and maybe even enhancement of tools like brushes,
yeah,
I don't feel uncomfortable with that
no, I don't.
necessarily. Yes, it will probably obliterate like Gumroad for Procreate brushes. That's, people can make whatever they want, but
Yeah,
sometimes that's not necessarily even the case either, to play devil's advocate to my own point, because some people might not have the concept or the vision as to what that brush they want
yeah,
and what it needs to do and how it needs to behave. So for somebody, who does maybe have that understanding, they can go into the app and make a prompt for it potentially. And I think in terms of, it's my job to think this because it's actually what I do in my day job. I don't think that it would even necessarily affect the app in any way in terms of its visual element. I think you would go to hit the plus in the, like, it's already there to create a new brush, and it would give you two options. Would you like to go straight to the brush studio, or would
yeah.
you like to go through our AI Procreate
Generate one.
wizard and answer a few questions to generate a brush of your design,
Yeah,
and make it clear and obvious. Put the little marker in the bottom right corner of it. It has a marker already to show what Procreate brushes are. Where it has the Procreate symbol in the bottom right of most brushes. If you make your own
mm.
brush, it doesn't have that symbol there. So put an AI with little sparkles or whatever, because I think that's the general symbol that most people are using for AI at the minute. Put the little sparkles in the bottom right to say this was generated with AI. I None of what I've just said makes me feel uncomfortable. I
No,
do not doubt that there is someone writing a comment right now who's furious about it. And I get it. I do get it. And I totally understand that there are certain things that come into the world that people don't like at first, but over time maybe come to terms with, especially if they're applied in the correct manner that we were just saying.
yeah,
It doesn't affect the canvas. And please understand that they're just our thoughts and opinions in a
yeah. Of
conversation.
course.
I think everybody's can always have different opinions on this matter, and that's fine. It's always good to hear different opinions, and maybe it changes our opinion going forward if someone says of a different one that maybe we think, actually, no, it shouldn't go anywhere near it. I think there is something to be said about AI scraping that's going on. I don't want
Yeah,
AI in my Procreate looking at every single element of every single canvas I've made and scraping that and understanding that. Absolutely not. That's a complete deal breaker.
how would you feel if you were able to import artwork into Procreate and it could analyze it and give you suggestions of brushes and colors and palettes and things like that that could do something similar? Would you feel that that's giving people too much of an advantage?
I think that's a fascinating concept. And the first use case that I thought of was standard procedure, really, of bring the Mona Lisa in and what brushes and palette would you use to make this?
Yeah,
To a degree, one of those is already in the app. You can upload a photo to a palette and
sure.
it makes a palette from a photo. So
Yeah,
if you wouldn't be upset about that one because it's already there, and then for it to break it down and maybe say what brushes would be good, I think in certain use cases I can think of already, that'd be fine. But when it's hypothetically, so me with my Patreon, for example, is because it runs differently to yours in terms of most tutorials are behind the paywall. They're not
Mhm.
two parters or anything like that. If someone was to then download my image and it work out, oh no, yeah, it's the leatherwood brush here and the whatever brush here, that makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. So that line is like, does it affect me or not? No. Then yeah, it's fine. If it does affect me, you're like, actually, no, I don't find that a very comfortable topic. What about you with the same question?
Um, I don't feel the immediate threat from AI at the moment. I know that
In
there's
a
various
general sense.
industries. Yeah, yeah, and I think that I've seen things on Twitter and other X other places, that I think Brad Calbo has retweeted something along the lines that it's already adversely affecting the kind of games industry, and people are losing their jobs because AI
Yeah.
is covering bases that normally would be humans doing those operations within the organization. But personally, I don't feel that threatened by it at the moment. In terms of what I do, I can only see the advantage for me as a creator right now. And I guess we just have to evolve with it. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't press stop on the progress with AI. Um, I suppose the most you can do at that point is think, well, how could it make my life better without bypassing the need for me to even bother doing anything? I think that's the
Mm.
difference, isn't it? How can it nudge you in the direction and make things more enjoyable and more successful without leaving you feel like you've cheated? And I
Yeah.
guess that for individuals is going to be a different point. I mean, even now, Procreate allows you to add hidden layers and trace that. We've had a discussion about tracing in the past as well, haven't we, in a different episode.
Explain that
But
feature, because some people don't know that that actually exists.
yeah, so you can add layers on Procreate. Say if you've got a photo reference or just a line, out the outline of something, and you can trace around it. And if you had a color picture, you could literally, almost like painting by numbers, just have a separate layer that you have as the opacity on lower, so you can still see the reference layer underneath, and you can paint directly over it. And then on the playback video, you can show people, look, this is how I did it, and it will play it as if you've drawn it without the reference. It will not show the reference layer in the playback video, and there'll be no evidence of it when people look at what you've shown them. They will not be able to see that actually there was a reference layer underneath that. So whether it's just a simple tracing or whether it's literally mapping out every single tiny part of the image and the whole thing, I mean, I feel like I can see that instantly when I see it on Facebook and other places. In my Facebook group, I do see people posting things that I can clearly see that it's had a reference layer underneath it, and they've either got the image and smudged it, so it looks like it's a slightly distorted version of that, or they've have it as a reference layer and they've painted directly over the top. And I feel like I can identify that. I don't tend to make a fuss over it within the Facebook group, because I feel that everyone's on their own journey, and if that's where they are at in order to get some satisfaction out of painting and drawing, then I guess I'm not going to interfere and put them down. However, I feel that, like on that example, there's loads of ways to, cheat within Procreate currently. So there's always going to be methods to cheat. It's all subjective and people's interpretation of how much you should use the tools as to whether it's cheating or not. But again, we've discussed in the past, there's the camera obscura, the kind of pinpoint hole in. I think they used to put it as a screen, as a canvas, and you have your
Mm.
subject matter on the other side of it, and then the light would go through the pinpoint and it would project it on the other side of the screen. It would be reversed, but artists then figured out that, okay, they've got the image and they can trace around the outlines at the very least, and they can map where everything's going to be. And suddenly, traditional painting took a massive leap forward and became extremely photographic looking. There's a whole history of art where, photographic painting suddenly became a big thing. And it's always happened. People have always used tools to their advantage, and I guess it's up for you as the individual, up to you as the individual, to try and find where that opportunity to really push it and find artistry, even despite the tools that you've used. And also then as the audience member or the viewer or the consumer to try to understand where the artistry is in that too. Um, I don't know, how do you feel about the elements of it, about the cheating elements of it? Do you think that it's a concern for
It
you?
it comes down. I think it comes down to the person, really. If you
Mm,
and like, even if they put a oh sorry, I don't want to go back to AI again, but even if they put
no.
something that was like super like cheat worthy, in a sense that it was super generative and actually
Hmm.
added to the canvas, I think that just ruins the whole reason that you downloaded it in the first place. The whole reason you downloaded it in the first place was to learn how to draw in
It's
Procreate.
true.
Like
Yeah.
you used the words earlier. I think it's like painting and drawing first, and
Yeah.
that's what it should be. And it will
Yeah.
always be. If it takes you 2 seconds to generate something or use something that really takes you cuts a corner and a massive corner, then I don't think you're going to get any joy out of it, and
Yeah.
you're not going to do something you don't get any joy out of. The whole point of it is to learn and to get better, and the skill and the craft. I used the word craft that we spoke about loads of times about it. Is I think if it's a brush and it's not don't do the whole thing, fair enough. I think that's great for leaves,
Yeah.
whatever. Generative on the canvas is totally different, and I think people that use like I think people at different levels know what they're doing, and once they go up a level in a sense of like confidence with drawing, etc., they know and know that previous thing that I was doing is not something I should now be doing. If I want to take drawing portraits seriously, then I can't just show the time lapse video with the layer of the photograph that was
Yeah.
provided to me as hidden. They'll know that it's a conscience thing of when it starts to pick up, or like, oh, I'm not actually getting any better. Like, I still can't do this without it. I need to. Do I want to carry on? And that's my ceiling. My ceiling has already been done because I can't go any higher than this. But do
Yeah.
I want to get better at the craft of the whole drawing on the iPad? One feature I mentioned a long time ago that I would absolutely love to see in the app, and I can think of ways that it would be completely fine for Procreate to do it, is, and I see this in another app, Infinite Painter. You have a couple of tabs on the home screen in the gallery, and one of which is like a discover, but it's like education wise. If they had in
Yeah.
the gallery a tab that said your gallery and then education or tutorials or something like that, and they went out and they spoke to all the Procreate content creators and they were like, right, here we go.
Mhm.
And I can see how this works. So if you're listening, I know where the idea came from. Okay, it's me. It was all my idea in the first place. But you could do it in a way that, like, you say, right, you go out to 20, 30 of the Procreate content creators, whoever it may be, and say, right, you can submit your videos. So it's just like a YouTube link to like a portal if it follows all of these rules. It
Yeah.
has free content that is not required to be paid for, i.e., you can't have a brush that requires you to go off to Gumroad and pay for it. It's not got any sponsors in it. That's fine. And even if they said, "Oh, you can't have your Patreon, names in there, maybe or whatever," because that's like a thing that could come in and make a bad impact if someone puts a stupid name in the video.
Mm.
But something like that, where it's like qualifications that are required, and then they put it into the app to
Yeah.
provide content for people to draw against. I would absolutely love that. It would be amazing for us for a start. Because I bet there's. I wonder, what do you think the percentage of people are that download Procreate that don't go to YouTube? They just draw.
Those people must exist, mustn't they? But I can't imagine that many people don't look at YouTube because it is quite a daunting big app, I suppose, initially, and YouTube is so you know it's just everywhere. I was trying to do the word ubiquitous. I can't. That's not the right word, is it? But it's everywhere, and so of course people look on YouTube for everything these days. I can't imagine that
Mm,
you would have an iPad with Procreate or not and not think to look at YouTube for
yeah.
information on it. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that would just be amazing, even if like they put some other requirements in there that maybe made us bend a tiny bit to do that. I just think that would be amazing, and
Yeah.
even in a sense that I mean, I see at the minute on Procreate's Instagram, they're paying for commissions for people that are like animators and paying for commissions. They're saying, right, make us a design using Dreams, and essentially just then showcasing it on Procreate's Instagram account, and that's somewhat as far as it goes. I don't know if there's any other deal involved in terms of providing like other visuals
Uh,
or anything else, or breakdowns or tutorials or anything like that. But I think the fact that they're already engaging with like content creators in that sense, then I think that would be an awesome step to take, to have like some sort of latest 10, or I don't know what they want to refer to it as, but just some way of getting the educators involved as well. Because
Integrating it, yeah, definitely.
you can imagine that if me, you, and every other content creator in this space jump ship, we all jumped for whatever reason to Fresco, or we jumped over to Clip Studio, Infinite Painter, whatever it may be. I think that like the educators in that space make that space somewhere that is like somewhere that people can learn, obviously, and get to know the subject and the program a lot more. So I think you have to somewhat at some times give a tiny bit back to the people that are actually building the community side of it for you, because yes, they've got their YouTube videos and so on, but they will only go so far. You would need a bunch of content creators, their own in-house ones, to make tutorials and stuff to educate on how to use the app.
I think they've massively benefited on YouTube tutorials
100%.
out there, people pushing the name Procreate out there. There's no question that relationship has been vital on their model of growth, really. Whether it was 100%. An intentional thing or not, it's been a very fortuitous thing for them to have hundreds of thousands of people out there bleating on about Procreate on YouTube. It's got to have massively helped their business, in the long term. Yeah, absolutely.
I was a bit cheeky back in the day when it first started for me. I remember messaging Procreate and saying, just like, I'm doing kind of all right for views and subscribers and stuff. Just wondering if you have like an affiliate scheme or anything for the App Store. They're like, no, mate, this pie's all ours. You're going hungry.
Yeah.
You have to try these things sometimes and just
you do.
yourself.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything else other than educators, AI brushes, textures, anything else that you can think of in your wish list? Because I know one that the subscribers will be begging for and have done for a long time, and it's a search bar in the Brush Studio. That's what so many people ask me for, is just a search bar to be able to find they end up with so many groups and so many brushes from all of us that they just end up with so many that a search bar is what they ask for. So guys, if you are still here, we do every time we cross over this hour mark, I love to give you a task to do, to pop spin an emoji previously in the comments. I think we'll roll with it for a third time. If you're still here, put the emoji with the star eyes, the face with the star eyes, and we'll know that you made it all the way to the very end. And I'm surprised at how many people do this at the very end. So if you are someone who does hang around with us right till the end of the shows, we really do appreciate it. And the best way that you can support the channel is by dropping a subscribe on the channel. It will help us grow massively. We've had loads of support on the channel, so we're very grateful for every single one of you watching the show every week. James, thank you as always for a wonderful conversation. Let's hope some of these features do come, but they're not going to ruin our careers too much. We'll see you all again next week, next Tuesday as always. Bye for now.